HTML. So again, this next 2 weeks are going to be, pretty big pivots away from the stuff that we've been talking about regarding algorithms, design, other things like that. Instead, today we're going to start a pivot towards the full stack part of the curriculum by talking a little bit about HTML and CSS. So we're going to start things off with HTML. So HTML, or hypertext markup language, which is hypertext markup language, is basically what you use to build a web page. So like any website on the internet is going to be constructed using this hypertext markup language. It's not exactly a software or a programming language in its purest sense, because HTML doesn't really have any algorithms. So all HTML is it reads whatever code you write, and it prints stuff out on the web. That's all HTML does. So if you tell it, hey, if you code something for a red square or a button, HTML will convert that when you open it in your browser into a red square and a button. There isn't really a way in pure HTML to be like, I need to create a class that has users and reads data. No. HTML is way simpler than that. All it is a tell me what you want printed on the web. I will print what you ask me to print on the web. That's really all there is to it. So the first thing to note about HTML is everything in HTML is a block. Everything in HTML is a block. At least that's the way that I like thinking about it. Here, let me go and let's go to my web browser and we can see an example of this. So here's, today's curriculum. Actually, this might be a little bit complicated. Let's just go to github.com. And this is the GitHub webpage. This is all created using HTML. And a good way to see the background code of a website is either viewing the page source, or what I like to do is hit inspect. And then we'll see a bunch of stuff. Or actually, here, this page might be too complicated. Let's just go to google.com. There we go. That's a little bit easier. And we'll just move this to here. And nope, I don't need that. Yeah, that looks good. So here we have the Google website. The Google website, code essentially is all of this stuff that's written in HTML. So let's break it down. So the first thing we start off with is this line up here that says doc type HTML. That just says that the page is written in HTML. Then you see we have this HTML and //HTML tag. The way that, again, everything works when you're using HTML is it creates blocks. The way that you demarcate a block is by using an opening tag, like the HTML tag, and a closing tag. And closing tags, 99.999% of the time, will use a closing slash like this. So let me put my sharing. Okay, I'm sharing Chrome. Okay, good. So within that HTML overall, we have two other tags. We have a header tag and a body tag. Then if we want to expand the body tag, you see here we have other blocks that are made up of these tags. We have a style tag. We have the div tag. That's like this entire area. And within that, we can break it down and see that this part is like your nav bar. This is the Google logo. This is the search area. This is the random stuff underneath that's completely blank. This is the stuff at the bottom. And again, don't worry about what exactly a div is or what any of these JS actions are. Don't worry about that. The main thing that I want you guys to focus on right now is, number one, HTML is just a series of blocks, and the blocks are made up of tags. So like style is a tag, this div is a tag, etc. And whatever's in those tags gets spit out onto the screen. Number two, whenever you have a tag, like this head tag, you always have to close it. It's sort of like in Python or JavaScript, where you can't have an unpaired parenthesis or an unpaired curly bracket. You can never have an unclosed tag. So let's go back to my WSL and let's see if we can make an example of how this works. So the first thing that we should probably do is say that this is going to be an HTML document, which we do by typing an HTML tag like so. And the nice thing about VS Code is whenever you include a tag, it will automatically include the closer for that tag, which is very helpful. So let's just do something really simple. Let's say HTML, and then we're going to use the H1 tag for a section header, and we'll say hello world, right? The good old traditional way to create any web page. And here, let's see if I can preview this once I move things out of the way. Yeah, I need to open this up in my browser. Okay, why are you not working? Here, I'm going to pause the recording while I figure out how to open this in my browser real quick. Okay, so anyway, after those misadventures with VS Code, here, actually, let me just split share the screen. We see here that on the left, okay, that's fine. That's fine. The only thing that our code says in here is number one, we're writing something in HTML. Number two, we're writing something that is in a header format, and then the thing that we've written in a header format. If I go back to my browser, we see here that, well, this is what our web page looks like. And just like before, like we did with the Google homepage, we can go to inspect elements and then see what's inside. So these are the comments that I wrote. So also, when you're writing HTML, comments are written using the less than sign, exclamation, and then two dashes, and then two dashes, and then a greater than sign. So there's some things that are slightly different, though. So if I go back to my code here, let me move cameras a little bit. If we go back to the code, we see that it just has HTML and this H1 and then a closing HTML tag. However, Google Chrome has decided to add in like this header and this body and then this NordVPN extension. Now, I can tell you, first off, some of these things, like the link ID for the Nord extension fonts, or this thing down here, those have just been added in by Google Chrome because I have a NordVPN extension enabled on this site. So don't worry about those. But the one thing I do want you guys to notice is it adds a header and a body. So in HTML, whenever you are working on a website, you don't ever really put things outside of a header or a body. Everything in general is usually contained within one of those two. So the header is basically going to be this thing right up here. It sort of lies outside of your actual text on your web page. Versus the body is all of the stuff that you see on the screen. Also, if you mouse over something in the Elements tab, it can help you see exactly how it's broken down, like on the web page. So you can do that, and then we can go into this H1 Hello World, and we see that the body covers my entire screen. Whereas this H1 tag, where H1 is basically a header, which says write it really big is it just lies in a smaller part of that box. So again, HTML, think of it as a series of nested boxes. That's the easiest way to think about it. Let's see, what else is probably useful to do? So we can go back to VS Code. So we can use our H1 tag. We can also use other headers. So there's headers like H1, H2. Let me see if so yeah, there's H1 all the way through H6, which all have successively smaller fonts. So we were to go like H4, this is in H4, and then I'll save it and then refresh it. We see here that it now says that this is in H4. So the H1 through H6 are just successively smaller and smaller fonts. Also note that by default, HTML's web pages are written in Times New Roman black and white font. This is just the way that HTML was originally set up. If you have seen enough Times New Roman in your life and you'd like to change it, like to make it look like any other web page on the internet, that is where CSS or cascading style sheets come in. And we'll get to that relatively shortly. But for now, we're just going to deal with the slightly ugly stuff. Okay, so there's a few more things that we should probably go through before transitioning to the style. So, again, we have the header here, which is all your metadata, and then you have your body. Also, the great thing about VS Code and HTML is if you're typing a tag and you're not sure what it does, it provides, number one, a little mini description of what it is. And then number two, it gives you an MDN reference. So an MDN, or the Mozilla Developer, I think it's network documentation, is basically the place to go to for HTML web documentation. They have things on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, in a lot of detail, and overall it's relatively easy to read. So, let's just pick something random. So let's say you're going through a web page and you see something that says, what's a good one to pick? Script. So you're like, okay, what is script? Well, again, it gives you a nice explanation here of exactly what it does. So it embeds JavaScript code. It gives you some attributes for types of scripts, and it goes into a lot of detail. It also gives examples, other things like that. So highly, highly recommend if you are debugging HTML, which does happen, or if you just want to learn more about tags, go to the Mozilla developer docs and then just go through them. They're in a lot of detail, so I only really recommend this if you're trying to debug something, but most of the time their documentation is pretty good. And honestly, it's one of the better sources of documentation for programming in general that I've seen on the web. Okay, so let's go back to our HTML. So I've got HTML, we've got our header, and then inside our body. So inside our body, we can write stuff. So I can say this is something I have written. Here we can just say H1, this is a title, and then this is something else. And then let's refresh this. Okay, this is really interesting. If we go back to the code here, I've written one line, and then the other line, and I physically pressed enter. But in HTML, it's all still on one line. Does anyone have any idea as to why that is, or why that might be happening?
Because when the DOM parses through the data, there's no input for next line or new
Yeah,
div.
pretty much. So number one, there's no when you just hit the enter key in HTML or create like a brand new line, it doesn't actually create a new line. It just thinks of it like a continuation of something else. So I've put like 15 spaces there. Okay, let's say like 8 spaces now. And if I hit enter, it's still all in one line. Do not worry about the script thing. That's just added by VS Code's live server. Um, so number one, in like the old days, people would write HTML like all in one line for an entire web page. So creating spaces or using new lines didn't really work. If you wanted to space things out, there's two ways that we can space something out horizontally. The first way is going to be using something called a break return or a BR, which, as it says here, represents a line break. If you put in a BR, as we just did over here, it'll put something on the next line. There are similar tools in place for tabs, for carriage returns, etc. The second one is something that Tim alluded to, which was putting something in a div. So a div is essentially like a container for stuff. So we could say like, as it says here, it doesn't have any meaning, but we can use it in order to nest components. So we could say like div, this is div1, and then we can also create another div and say this is div2. If I hit save, we now have these two divs that are stacked together vertically. So again, we can see that all of this is HTML is all boxes at the end of the day, and it's all stacked boxes. So in our body is a big box. Inside that, we have our title box. Then we have our div. And inside of our div, we have, all right, and then after our div, we have another div. And this div is located in the body, which is located in the HTML file. So the easiest way to think about HTML again is just like stacking boxes or nesting boxes together. All right. Are there any other questions about divs or tags in HTML before we move on to some examples of tags? Okay, great. So there's a few types of tags that are probably good to introduce to you guys now. So the first one is going to be in your header. So we'll talk about metadata later. That'll come in when we start using JavaScript later in the week. But an important one is going to be title. So the title tag, nope, I only want one closing tag. A title tag basically tells you the title of the web page. So if you look at the top of your browser, and you can see what the web page is called. So if we were to say hypothetically, like this is like my sample website as our title, and we go back to our browser, we see here that now my sample website shows up at the top. You can technically put the title in the body of your web page as well, but in general, you want to have your title tag be all the way at the top of your HTML, or all the way at the top in your header, instead of in the body, because the header usually contains all of the stuff that you don't immediately see, like when the user looks at your main web page. So let's see, we talked about header tags. Then there's also bold, italicize, and underline. So if we were to put in, let's say, a B tag, or a span is also what it's called. We can just say like bold text. There is an I, which is going to be italics. And then there's U, which is underlined. And we see that here it says again, bold text, italics, underlined. So one thing to keep in mind, there's two types of tags in HTML. The first type is called an inline tag or element, and the second type is called a block element. So an inline tag or an inline element is something like bold text or italics or underline, which means it just goes in the line of whatever else is in its parent. A block tag is something like a div, where if we zoom out, like the div stretches all the way across the screen. Or like the H1 tag stretches from here all the way to the other side of the screen. What does that mean for us? So if we try putting in our code, two H1 tags next to each other, this is H1 number 2. So recall this. So again, since an H1 tag stretches all the way across the screen, if we put another H1 tag right after it, this guy's technically being placed right here. But there's no room for a second H1 tag at the edge of the screen. So it has to go to the next line, which is what makes it a block tag. It takes up an entire block. Versus if we go inside our div and we look at the bold, italics, underline, those elements are all inline elements because they don't take up an entire screen width or part of it. They don't take up an entire screen width. They just take up part of it. So, for example, the bold text part only takes up a box the size of whatever's inside it. Similarly, if we were to use a link, so link tags are going to be a href. So href here is an attribute, which is going to be the link that this goes to. So we could say like https google.com. Then we could say Google homepage. And we'll just put in like a break return. See here that the Google homepage is going to be a link. I can click it and it'll redirect you to the Google homepage. But again, so bold, italics, underline, and links. Those are all examples of inline tags. So let me just make a comment here. Inline tag examples. And then if you want to demarcate between inline tags, you'll need to use break returns. As in if you want to space them out for either break returns, carriage returns, something similar to that. Any questions about inline tags at this time? Okay, does somebody in that case want to give me a really simple, really quick example of how inline tags are different from block, or inline elements are different from block elements? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. So let's back up a few steps. So first off, does the overall idea of HTML being composed of these elements, does that make sense to everyone so far? I know it's a bit of a paradigm shift going from the like classes and variables and functions to just like stacking and nesting things. So it's important that the distinction makes sense. Is there any confusion or any clarification that on that before we move back to the specifics of the different types of tags? So rephrasing a little bit. So the two types of blocks that we can have, or I guess I'll stop saying blocks and I'll start saying elements because that's the more appropriate term for HTML, is either stuff that spans all the way across the screen or pieces that are small. So for example, like this body tag, the body of your HTML document is the entire website. That's the entire screen. Because by definition, the body is the entire screen, it stretches across the whole screen, which makes it a block element. In contrast, something like this italics doesn't stretch across the whole screen. Italics only stretches across the width of whatever's in it, which is this italics thing. And also we can put italics in a line with other stuff, which is why it's called inline. Does that distinction make sense so far? Any questions about that? Okay. So, all right, let me start asking some questions then, because I really do want to make sure that this fundamental stuff is clear before we start delving into the different types of tags and styling and other more confusing things. So, gotcha. Based on what you see on the screen, do you think an H1 tag is going to be a block tag or an inline tag?
Based on what I'm seeing on the screen, it looks like a block because I see it taking the width of the entire screen.
Yeah, pretty much. So it takes up the whole screen, and if you put one thing after it, it still takes up the whole screen because there's no room for another side. So that is a block tag. All right, let's see. Jordan, what about this div? Which again, div means like nothing for us right now. It just means like a div like holds a bunch of stuff in it. Is this a block or an inline element? Also, I don't think I can hear you. We can hear you if you're talking. Can anyone else hear Jordan, or is it just me?
No, I can't hear him.
Okay. Chat. Yep. Okay. Yeah, no worries. And yes, that is a block tag because again, it stretches across the whole screen. Now, what about something like this ahref, like this link? Charles, what do you think?
Oh, that one's definitely an inline element.
Yep, that one's in line because, well, again, it's part of a line. Okay. So let's see. We talked about the head, which is again, the head is just basically stuff that you can't really see except the title. The title is really the only thing in the head that you can physically see. And then the body is all the stuff on the front of your website. So let's see.
Test.
Oh, yep, I can hear you now, Jordan. Glad to see the troubleshooting worked. Okay, so we talked about the H1. Then divs are what you can use in order to stagger different parts of your web page. So, we could call this, we can also label things in Python. But think of this as like an ID or title, ID. There's different ways to do it. Just for now, I'm only going to stick to saying ID. And we could call this div ID. We could say this is like the main page. Then we could create another ID down here. That's for like, let's say the search bar. This is a search bar. Something like that. So what this essentially lets us do when we're going through our code is label things differently. So again, remember that HTML is just like a bunch of nested things at the end of the day. And obviously, if you're nesting, like, I mean, we're nesting a lot of things right now. We're nesting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like 10 things. That's just for like a simple looking HTML page with like 4 lines. Now, imagine an HTML page that has images, it has a navigation bar, it has forms, it has code, like JavaScript, it has a ton of other things. Organization wise, you want to be able to know what part of your website corresponds to what part of the code. So that's where divs really come in handy. So again, divs are basically just used as organizers. So by labeling our divs with IDs in this way, I can say, for example, like that I've got my title, I have whatever goes on my main part of the page, and then I have this thing for, like a search bar or something like that. So IDs are really good because they give you the ability to label essentially what something is. So if you forget later, or if you just have 300 lines of code and you lose track of where you are, you can tell really easily by looking at, within your div. Also, one nice thing that the console does, at least in Chrome, when you, again, go here, right click, and then inspect, is if you take a look at, like, let's say the underlined U, and you are like, I'm seeing 300 lines of code. I'm looking at this one line, but I don't know where it is inside of, the overall, web page. So remember, HTML is all just nested blocks. If you look down here at the bottom, it tells you exactly where the tag that you're at, whatever you've highlighted, is at. So the path essentially is you start with HTML, which is the big page. From there, we're going into the body. From there, we're going into a div whose ID is main page. And then from there, we're in the underlined element. If we were to go back to, let's say, google.com, and we do the same thing, here, I'll just start clicking around a little bit. Like, let's say that there's this style tag right here. And I'm looking at the style tag and I'm like, okay, I don't even remember what the style tag is for. And you can see the route that we took to get there. We're going HTML, then body, and from there we're looking at the main part of the page. Then we're looking at the search bar, and then we're looking specifically at this style class. So again, that's just the basic stacking and nesting part of HTML. There are some other tags that we can go over, but before I keep moving forward, is everything making sense so far? I just want to make sure that, if anybody has questions, please, please, please do not be shy of asking them, because this is meant to be like the foundational day for HTML stuff. So any questions at all are completely welcome. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and take a 3-minute break, so that way maybe if you guys want to come up with some questions, you can. And then we'll come back for part 2 of the lecture, which is going to be about more advanced tags and CSS. So we'll come back around like 6:21, 6:22, something around there. So we've talked about, how divs are used to store stuff in general. And because they're a great example of block tags. Inside that, we have a bunch of other types of tags that are inline, which are like our bold, italicized, underline, our hyperlinks. And also we use break returns in order to add spacing between inline elements. You can also use break returns to add spacing between block elements, but we won't really do that too much. There's better ways to do it. So there's a few other types of elements that we should probably or that would be good to go over. So we talked about links, which have an href attribute. So when you see that says ahref, the A means that it's a link. The href basically says that this is not just any link, this link points to something. And what's the thing it points to? Well, that's in the equal sign. So an ahref always requires one attribute. Yeah, we could do a list while we're at it. So let's add it to like the search bar. So we can add in a list. So UL is going to be an unordered list. So there's a couple of different types of lists that we can use in HTML. So there is an unordered list, and let's start there. So an unordered list is basically like a bullet list. And the way that you use a item in a list, or like an individual bullet, is going to be by using li, which is for an individual item. So this could be like item 1, this would be item 2, this would be, and that's a closing tag. Let's just do like one more. Item 3. I'll save it. And we'll go back here. And we see here, again, down at the bottom, inside of our search bar div, that we now have a list. And that list takes up space physically. Now, remembering our discussion of block and inline elements, Raymond, is the UL element, do you think it's a block element or an inline element?
Inline element.
Why would it be inline?
Because of the way that it is. The block letters are the bigger ones that are all bold, and then these are like within a line of the HTML file.
Oh, okay. I think I'm seeing a little confusion. So the block elements are ones that stretch across the whole screen, versus the inline elements are the ones that are like lengthwise, they're like constrained by whatever's in them of sorts. So do you still feel like it's a inline for the UL?
I guess it's a block.
Yeah, it's a block. Because again, so the only thing behind a block element is if it stretches across the whole screen. If it's an inline element, it means you can stack them in a line like horizontally with each other. So yeah, so in general, your lists act as block elements. But additionally, so do the things within your lists. So how, like the list element, or list element, which is denoted by li, is the entire list element is also going to be a block element. However, whatever is inside of your list element might not be. So it could be, like item 1, for example, is just ordinary text. It says hashtag text. That means it's just like normal text. That is another example of something inline. If you want to add more list elements, you just add more li/lis. We can change this from UL to an ordered list, or OL, as you see here. And there's a really subtle change. For UL, if you'll remember, it had bullet points. You can change those bullet points to whatever else you want, but like to stars or arrows or triangles. But OL is an ordered list, which will take it as 1, 2, 3, etc. You can change those to ABCs. You can use that for. There are ways, I won't cover them today, but there are ways to indent or unindent your list. So that's the second type. And then the last one is going to be a menu. And a menu is fairly similar to a unordered list. There are some differences when you start thinking about forms that we'll talk about. But for now, we can think of menus and unordered lists as as the same thing. Okay, so any questions about lists? Okay, all right, good, glad to hear. So let's see, forms will probably be a little bit too complicated to talk about right now, so we'll skip that, and we'll move on to talking about the second half of today's lecture, which is about cascading style sheets. So what exactly is a cascading style sheet? Let's be brutally honest. Is this a website like what we have on the screen? Is this something you would willingly visit? Like, is this something that like screams to you, this was carefully designed, thought out, like they hired a nice graphics designer? No, this website looks absolutely terrible. And the reason for that is because this website does not have any styling on it. In order to add that styling, like, you know, better fonts, adding some colors, maybe some graphics, for that, we bring in cascading style sheets or CSS. So there's two ways that we can write CSS. One of them is by importing a CSS file. The other way is by just writing CSS for our elements inline or in our elements. So the way that we do that is by, well, adding style. So let's say that, what's something we could add styling to? I'll just add in like a third div. Let's say div ID is I am a div. This is a random div. So if we wanted to add some styling to our div, we could do so very easily by just saying style and then writing whatever our styling is. As you see here, it says contain CSS styling to be applied to the element. We're going to forget the recommendation for now because I just want to demonstrate how styling works. So when we're adding styling, again, we add it using first the equal sign, and then we're going to write it in CSS style notation. So there's many different things that we can change. You can add borders, you can add a highlight, you can change the font size. But for right now, we're just going to do something very simple. We're just going to change the color. And again, you can see here all of the different options for things that we can change. You can change like the scroll bar color. You can change, you can change a border color. You can do like so many things. Right now, we're just going to do like a simple color change. And we see here, there's a ton of different types of colors that we can change our font from. So let's say, what's a nice color? These are all really bright. Here, let's go with medium blue. So before I show you guys what this is going to do in our website, Eden, what do you think that adding the style tag here will do when we go back to my Google Chrome window?
I think it will turn the I am div, that color, well, that text, that color.
Okay, so is it only going to change it for I am a div, or is it going to change it for all the divs?
That's a very good question. I mean, if it's within that one div, maybe just that one.
Okay, let's see. So let's go here and let's see what colors have changed. Okay, I'm going to change this because the color is not very easy to see. What's a bright one? Chocolate. There we go. That's really different. Ta-da! We see that only one thing's color has changed, which is the stuff in this is a random div, which is that one. So yeah, Eden, you are completely correct. So when you add in a style in this inline fashion, like we just did, it will only change the styling for whatever is inside of, or for whatever element that style is inside of or selected for. So in this case, because we add it to only to I am a div, it'll only add in this styling, this chocolate color, to the stuff inside of that. It will not change the stuff in main page or search bar or the title or whatnot. So again, remember, everything in HTML is all boxes. You're adding a style, in this case, to one specific box. You're not adding it to all of them. So that's sort of like the first, I guess, lesson of style. So this is sort of the easy way to add styling to a singular element. But we're only adding styling here to one element. We're only adding it to this I am a div. Now, let's say that hypothetically, I wanted to make all of my divs have, let's say, like green lettering. How can I do that? All right, so the boring way here, let's change this from chocolate to green. The boring way to do this would be to copy paste this into every single div. We can save it, and we see that, yeah, that works, but that's boring. Because think about it, if you're going to write 50 divs and you accidentally forget to update the style of one of them, well, that thing is going to be normal, and it's going to look terrible. So we need to add in a style tag, and that will go in our header. So remember how I said the header, apart from the title, is where all the stuff that you don't see comes into play? Well, that's exactly what we're going to use it for right now. So we'll add in a style. And again, as it says here, it allows you to embed style information in your document. So add in style. Now, one thing to note is when you're writing styling inline, like we just did, it's going to look a little bit different from when you add it in a style tag or when you're creating an internal style sheet, if you want to be slightly fancier. Because we now have to specify what you're adding this to. So we're not going to need the style equals anymore, and we don't need the quotation marks. But first thing I'm going to have to do is put this in curly brackets. Now, can anyone remind me where we've seen these curly brackets before?
Meaning HTML or
Or just like in general?
string interpolation?
Okay. I mean,
JavaScript.
Dictionary.
Okay. Dictionary. Thank you. Yes. So what CSS is CSS is basically a grand old dictionary of, well, value or like attributes and their values. So here, let's try this. Div color green. So again, I'm not going to tell you guys what this means directly, but here's somebody who I haven't heard from today. Sandy, what do you think this style tag is doing before we go back and actually see it?
I think it's like a blanket saying that all divs in the body will be the text will be color green.
That sounds plausible. Let's see. So if we go back here, we see for every, well, it looks like it. I mean, this is part of a div, this is part of a div, this is part of a div, and this H1 tag is not part of a div. So that's still black, so that's safe. But yeah, so again, the styling here applies to every single div element that we've created. Another way that we can see that is I can go up, I can click, let's say like this, I am a div, and we can see styles in here. If I go up a little bit, it shows you the element style. So the element styling, like the element specific styling, it doesn't have any. But we see here that it does have some styling from demo.html. Oop, not source. I want elements. It does have some styling from this style element up here, which says that it's going to be colored green. And then it's got a block display. But what we can do now is I can stay style in here, and we can override it by saying color red. So what just happened? Well, we have defined a style overall for all the divs in the top of the HTML document. And we're saying every single div is going to be green. But I am a div, like this custom div that we created. We have overridden that by specifying an element specific style. And it says that right down here. We're specifying it. We're using color as red. And that crosses out the previous styling that we set up back in the top style, where we said that all divs are colored green. So it's basically like all divs are colored green, but we're going to color this one red. So if you are applying a style to all elements of a specific type, you can use element-based styling, which is, again, by putting style equals to help you override that. So any questions about adding styling inline or in an internal style sheet before we talk about external style sheets? Okay, so there's a few other ways that we can do this. So instead of specifying inline like we did here, saying style is color red, let me refresh the page so it's all back to green. We can also specify a style specifically. So we could say, let's see, it'll be hashtag, and then I am a div. So you use hashtags to reference IDs. So we could change the color now to red, and then we'll just put another semicolon. So ideally, here, let me comment this out real quick. Now, if we go back here, we've specified that the I am a div ID is going to be colored red. But if I go ahead and uncomment this overall div specification, and we click on I am a div, we'll notice that the div overall color is going to override what we set specifically for an individual element. However, there are ways to combine your selectors together, such as, here, let's see if this will work. So say div and then hashtag I am a div. Okay, well, we can worry about that later. But essentially, if you really want to make a difference when you're when you're trying to use styling for a bunch of different things and then also style an individual element differently, inline is the easiest way to do that, but it's not always the prettiest. So for that, that's where the weighting comes in handy. Okay, any questions about styling so far? Okay, so there is one other way to do your styling, which is we can also import style sheets externally. So again, remember that all of this is called a CSS style sheet. And we can do things in line. We can do it using an internal style sheet, or the other thing that we can do is link to an external style sheet. So let me resume share. So let's go ahead and pretend like this style doesn't exist. In order to link to an external style sheet, we have to use the link tool. So first we need to specify the type of relationship, which is going to be a style sheet. And we should also probably create, actually that's okay. Here, let's go ahead and create a style sheet. I'll just say styles.css, and that will be our style sheet. We'll do that later. And then, so first we have the type of relationship, which is a style sheet. And then secondly, we have the ahref, which specifies what you're linking to, just like we did in that main page where we link to the Google homepage. And we can do a /styles.css. And I'll just have this be a /link. So our styles.css is currently blank. But, again, we can do the same thing. We can add in a div tag and we can say like font, and we can just specify that it's going to be bold, like the entire section. So we go back, hang on, it might not have imported correctly. Let me change it to color and then like blue. There we go. So if we go back to our demo page, what are we doing? So we have these styles in our styles.css sheet, which says that everything in our div, whatever our div is going to be colored blue. We then import that into here, and then that applies it everywhere. So by essentially saying that we're linking an external style sheet, that's the same thing roughly as creating a brand new style sheet and then copying in this div color blue in here. So this and that functionally do the same thing. In terms of neatness, though, what if you have a style sheet that has like different styling for like 15 different types of divs? Well, you don't probably want to write all of that in your HTML document. And that's where linking to the external style sheet can really come in handy. So again, HTML files with .html, CSS files with .css, and CSS is almost entirely going to be written out as the name of the thing that you're trying to edit, or the element, or its ID. You're going to add in the attribute that you're trying to edit, and then the value. And you can edit multiple attributes. So, we could say like color, and then you could say, oh, no, I still need VS Code. Okay, there we go. We could say that I'm going to edit the color, and then we can also edit, let's say the background color of the element is going to be dark slate gray. So again, remember, CSS is all a dictionary. So attribute, value, etc. And why does VS Code keep on crashing on me? This is very strange. Well, anyway, good thing that we're basically at the end of the HTML lecture at this point. But yeah, so again, CSS is just element value pairs pretty much all the way down. That's honestly about it for the intro lecture. Do y'all have any questions, comments, concerns?